Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is the final bird feeder event of the academic year. Like every other bird feeder event, it's a chance for us to gather as a group, to recharge, dip our beaks, nibble a little bit, and just celebrate some of the things that we love, like advertising, creativity, brand building, and just really smart people. So welcome to all of you. I would like to introduce our guest for today. Our guest is Tim Nudd. Tim is the editor-in-chief of the Clio Awards. He's the editor of Muse by Clio, which is an absolutely a must-read for all of you. And he's been writing about creativity and advertising throughout his career. So let's give a virtual North Philadelphia welcome to Tim, and let's get ready to have a good night to talk about some creativity and his new podcast. Tim, welcome.
Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you guys for having me. This is great.
This is wonderful. And you know, when Sheena put our paths across each other, I said, this is fantastic. This is a great way to end the semester for us. But before we dive in and start talking about Tagline, which is a fantastic show, and I drove to Boston the last couple of weekends to help my sister move. It kept me company on the Merritt Parkway, so it's fantastic. But before we do that, Tim, if you could just share with us some of the sort of major stops along your way on your career path that put you where you are today.
Yeah, sure. Well, I started out writing about the opposite of creativity, which was the oil and gas business. So I always thought I wanted to get into politics actually when I was younger. And I went to college, fell in love with playwriting, fell in love with student newspaper. I was at WashU in St. Louis, and they didn't have a J school there. So I just decided, you know what, I'll just get a lit degree. And of course, had to move to New York to become a writer after that. So fell into a job writing, as I said, about oil and gas. And I did it for 3 years, and I was, I barely made it out the other side. I was like, this is the most boring thing I've ever, been involved in. And, I decided I want to write about something creative. And, advertising always seemed really interesting to me from a journalism point of view, because it's probably got the most number of creative folks working in it. And there's so much talent in the business. And it just doesn't get covered a lot, as a creative business. So you look at all the journalists covering music or covering, Hollywood and all that stuff. And there was very few of us even interested in writing about advertising. So this was, late 90s. And so I just called up Adweek at the time and I said, do you guys need an editor or a writer, or what do you need? And they said, sure, come on in. And that was 97. And I've been writing about creativity ever since. So I was an editor for a couple of years. And one of my strongest memories from Adweek was the first spot that I really got to write about from a creative point of view was the Guinness Surfer commercial. I give a little presentation about this actually, and it was quite a first one to have. It's like one of the best commercials of the 20th century. Jonathan Glazer, of course, and ever since then I've been kind of fascinated with creativity, with how it's expressed in advertising, the strategy. I'm also just beyond the creative side, I'm just fascinated by all sides of the ad business. I think the account side is fascinating. I think the creative side and the media strategy, all of it together, even the clients. I mean, you look at all of what goes into making a great campaign, and it's remarkable how everyone plays a fascinating role. And so I just fell in love with writing about it, and I've been doing it ever since. So I was at Adweek for many, many years. And then about 3 years ago, Nicole Purcell, who's the president of the Clios, she'd been sort of knocking on my door for a couple of years saying, we want to start a content practice over at the Clios. And at the time, Adweek was pushing more into awards and events. They obviously had a very mature content business. And, I wasn't really super excited about helping them expand their awards and events side, because it's, I just want to be a writer. I want to cover this stuff editorially. And so when Nicole proposed that I come to Clio's, it seemed like an amazing opportunity, because here's a company with a very mature events and awards business, and they want to get their growth area is in content, which was perfect for me. So we got to start something from scratch, which is Muse. It's been going for 3 years now, and it's great. We're a very small staff. It's myself and Dave G, who's in Boston, and Angela over in Paris. And Angela's just part-time, so it's really 2.5 of us. And we lean on the industry a lot to contribute articles and essays and things. And we have a lot of video series. I feel like we do a lot with a little, and our focus is purely on the creative process, really, and how great it is, and the people that do it, and what makes them tick. And that sort of leads us up to Tagline, which is, it's part of Muse, but it's a new product. It's really our first podcast. We did one podcast right when I first joined, which was a series of interviews with Lee Clow about his career. That was sort of a one-off, and this is kind of our first original series that we've done on our own. So yeah, I mean, those are the major things. And I love writing about this business. I find it endlessly fascinating, and probably only getting more so as we go into the digital age.
That's great. Was that I'm only going to say this once? Was that the Lee Clow one?
I'm only going to say this once, yeah, which was fascinating. He welcomed me into his house, and we had a couple of days of conversations that we turned into a little podcast, which was really cool.
Wow, that's talk about a fly on the wall. Students, that's one to look. In addition to Tagline, dig that one out, because that's fantastic. That my dogs became lovers of advertising as I listened to that on the dog walks. So that was great. Tim, let me ask you, why do you think there is that the coverage vacuum for advertising? Why doesn't it generate the same interest in a broader group of writers or editors?
Well, I think it's just fundamentally it's not considered an art form, right? So, and of course it's technically not art. It wants something from the viewer, therefore it's something different than art. But to me, it's just as creative, sometimes even more so, in terms of you have to work with a client, and you have to hit the strategy, and you have to sell product. So these are all goals that are pretty interesting dynamics to do pieces of craft around, to write around, to art direct around. So but for journalists, I think that they're just like for folks, I think sometimes in the industry there's a bit of a stigma around do I want to write about advertising? Isn't it just sort of hucksterism and all that, without seeing that really. I mean, I think Tagline shows this too, is just the remarkable process that actually goes into this, and the craft and the ideas. And when it's done right, it is a sort of an art form, I think. And for me, though, I'd rather not have too many people covering it, because it's wonderful to have the ear of folks in the business, and just find out what makes them tick, and have them come to Muse and have it be one of not 100 outlets, but just a handful that really do this stuff well. So yeah, I love the fact that it's a bit of a smaller pool.
And it's astounding that the staff of Muse is so small, because you talk about something that punches above its weight. That's probably the faculty and I could retire if the students would just read that religiously and pull some lessons from it. That's a phenomenal thing. It's great. So let's, I'm sure everybody here, part of my promotion within the college was to, I shared links to the episodes of Tagline. I'm sure everyone has listened to them, and they'll all nod along, just like they all do the reading before classes. That's fantastic. So, other than just looking for a different outlet, was there a hole you felt that Tagline felt that we needed another podcast?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't think there's anything like Tagline out there, and this is not to disparage the other advertising podcasts out there. I think there's a number of good ones that I really enjoy. A lot of them, though, are they're very there's a sameness to the formula, right? It's a 45-minute interview, or there's a little bit of a roundtable, which is great. I love I get a lot of insights from that format as well. What I felt like was missing, though, and this, it really started back in 2019, which was the 60th anniversary of the Clios. We did a lot that year, and I mentioned this in the series trailer because this is really where the seed of the idea came from. Dave, my writer Dave in Boston, I had him as part of our 60th anniversary celebrations. I had him sort of pick a handful of campaigns and go back, and it was a very historical focused year for us, and go back and find a single person who worked on on, it ended up being 14 campaigns. So he found 14 people that worked on 14 classic campaigns and just tell us a story we don't know about this, about the making of this. And the stuff we got back was so amazing and weird. And, Susan Hoffman from Wieden and Kennedy told us this story about, Dan Wieden, forcing the creative department to use the line, "Just do it." And nobody there wanted to. They all hated it, thought it was terrible. I'd never heard that story before. And I don't think many people had, outside of the people who worked there. So to me, I said, okay, if we can get an amazing story like that out of one person, what are we going to get out of 10 people? And how are they going to remember this work differently or the same? And so, I just sort of started imagining what it would be like to gather together folks who had worked on classic stuff. And, just that's, to me, the history of this business is the work. The work is the history in many ways. And so these stories about the work really haven't been told comprehensively. They've been told, the people know some of the stories because, it's a very small business in the end, and everyone sort of knows everyone in a lot of ways, certainly in New York and in LA. So I thought, why don't we just try to, do a sample of one of these, a pilot episode, and just see if it works as a format. So the first one I actually did, and this is going back a ways. So I started this before COVID, believe it or not, like last January. And one of the spots that I absolutely loved when I was covering work for Adweek was the Johnny Walker, Robert Carlyle film from, I think, 2009 that BBH London did. And so I just gathered up, 5 or 6 of the folks that worked on that, and we did a little sample episode, and that'll be coming up in a couple of weeks, actually. So it is part of season 1 of Tagline, and it worked great. And I was like, wow, this is, don't get me wrong, it's a heavy lift for each episode. It's a lot of interviewing, it's a lot of writing, a lot of editing. But it's not terrible. It can be done. And I was always, thought to myself, like, why hasn't anyone done this before? And it seemed like a big gap, certainly in the audio market within the advertising space. And the other somewhat fortunate thing was everyone was available to chat with me during COVID. So I didn't have to work around people's meetings as much, and everyone's home. And they have an extra hour maybe at the end of the day to chat with me. So over the course of quite a few months, spoke to 68 people for season 1. And, we're rolling those out as we speak. We're halfway through. We got 4 more episodes for season 1. And we're well into interviews for season 2 as well. So, I feel like it's a special product. And I think that, it is a commitment, right? It's 45 minutes to an hour per episode. But for folks who love advertising, for folks who are trying to learn, how to do it and what the sort of cultural value of it is, and just the process of folks working together to create this stuff, I think it's pretty special.
That's great. And you're right. There is, as I look at the short list of the ones that I listen to, the Interrupter series is great, and Talking to Ourselves is great. But yeah, right. It's these singular interviews with people, and you don't have the breadth that you guys are tracking down. Do you find people are willing to talk? Are there things, do they get to a certain line and they have to stop? The industry is notoriously secretive with, especially strategy things.
Yeah, it depends. I think, it certainly depends. The Volkswagen episode, I was a little, ticked off because Lance Accord he refused to speak to me, and he's the director of that spot, right? So how do you really tell the full story without having the director? And we're going through this with a few other episodes too. Speaking of Lee Clow, and I'm trying to get an Apple Mac and PC episode together, and it's for a while I wasn't sure, like, why doesn't Justin Long want to talk about this? And then the ads came out a few weeks ago where he's now pitching Dell or whatever it is. And, oh, now I understand why he's not wanting to speak. But mostly folks are pretty open. If you hear the first few episodes that we've done, the Dos Equis thing, I don't think anything was left on the table there, particularly. And the good thing also is that a lot of these campaigns being historical, there's not as much, need to be secretive about the strategy, probably. The flip side of that, though, is that it's difficult to get the current clients to talk about historical work. So, the CMOs of these places now don't feel ownership of that work if it was done on someone else's watch. So it can be more difficult to get current clients to talk, but in a way it's great because the clients who were the clients at the time often feel freed up to chat about that stuff. So Willem Vanderhoven from the Secchi's episode is a great example. He really sort of told me the whole story of how all that went down. So I think it just depends. But I haven't had a problem with access. I think out of 72 people, I've gotten 68 to talk to me and be relatively open. So it's going well so far.
That's great. And of course, your name and having Clio's attached to it helps too. If Alan Tempest and I walk around trying to ask people questions, we may not get the warm welcome, but that's what you got to do. Well, let me ask you this, Tim. With the students here, a part of what they'll have to do is pull information from, whether it's an internship or whether it's that fateful question at a job interview. Do you have any questions for me? Any tips for the students about getting people to open up about their work and their experiences?
Gosh, I don't know. I was terrible at this when I was younger. I remember being terrified to even call Walter Campbell, who was the copywriter on the Surfer Spot. I was literally had to pluck up the courage for an hour to even just call him on the phone. I think a lot of that stuff just comes with practice, probably. But the other thing is, I think people are remarkably open, and nowadays it probably has something to do with social media, where there's a sense of people are accessible, and if you approach people in the right way, in the right spirit, I think people are they do want to help, and again, they're available to help, which is great too. So I always just say to folks coming into the business, just engage in that space. Ad Twitter is a really interesting place. There's a few thousand people in there that just part of this little community that's just sort of ad Twitter, and you can meet so many interesting people in there and sort of get to know them in a funny way. And it's all the conversations are just around what's happening in the business at the time. I found that useful. I mean, journalists, of course, find that kind of thing really useful. But just as a way of celebrating the work, going back to what we were talking about earlier, it's hard to sometimes celebrate. Advertising can be a tough business. It's easy to beat yourself up constantly, I think, in advertising, because ideas are getting killed left and right, and just having that community around you to sort of lift you up when you're feeling sort of a little down, I think is pretty useful.
Yeah, it is an industry of rejection. At the most basic level, you'll 100%. March into a meeting with 3 ideas, so 66% of your work is going to die that day. And that's a good day. And I always laugh at the references to baseball, right? If you hit 300, you get in the Hall of Fame. That'd be great for advertising too.
Well, that's to me, that's what Tagline kind of is about, is thinking about inspiration differently, which is to say, to me, I think most people think of inspiration as you see this wonderful thing that's perfect and you want to aspire to it. To me, it's almost like these things that came out of these wonderful ad campaigns, all of them were a struggle. All of them started with bad or mediocre ideas, or many of them did. The ideas grew, so to me, it's the relatability is what's inspiring. Is you don't have to produce something perfect right off the bat. You can, Fearless Girl started out, as this idea for a fearless cow staring down the bowl. The best ad idea of that year was almost the worst ad idea of that year. And, there was so many examples like that, trying to think of, there's several in season 1 of Tagline in particular where, the idea was not there at all to begin with. And everyone can relate to that, of course. So the idea that perfection is what you should be chasing is completely the wrong way to look at it. And I think what Tagline reminds you is that, it's just work, have fun, try to do good work, build on your ideas. And that's, to me, what's inspiring about these stories.
I think that's a great a great point, right? So often we see this beautiful polished finished product, especially if it's these campaigns that have, you know, risen to the surface and stood up to the test of time. You know, it can be intimidating, right? And you think that those scribbles on your notepad really need to be, you know, the brilliance. I need to have, you know, here's to the crazy ones in my first draft on my, and it just doesn't work that way.
No, for sure. Quite the opposite, in fact.
Yeah, and you know, and that's and it's one of the challenges for us on the education side is that, you know, we have these students who are, that's what they see, and we have to lay out that roadmap on how they get there. And I think Tagline is a fantastic tool for us. You know, selfishly, we celebrate what you're putting together because it just adds to our arsenal for helping the next generation do fantastic work.
Thank you. Yeah, I do think it's you know, I had students in mind when when we started building this thing. I mean, I think it's great for folks who've been in the business because they often will know some of the people involved, and some of the stories are just hilarious. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely an interesting educational component to this, and yeah, we would love to get, you know, as many students on board to listen as we can.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. I agree. I mean, that this is going to be must listen. Please don't take it down. We need it. So many things go up and down. I pull up old playlists on YouTube from 6 months ago, and half the spots are gone, and I have to go digging some more. So, you know, we'll let everybody dive in and listen to the specific story elements of each episode. But you know, as you look at this larger body of campaigns that you see, in addition to sort of the rawness of the ideas at the beginning, what are some of the other commonalities that they all seem to share, or most of them share?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think first of all, I think what shines through is just the idiosyncrasies of the people making the work. So, you know, and I think Jeff Kling really, you know, put a point on this in the Dos Equis episode, which is, you know, you have to be yourself, you have to be unique. And if you're not bringing your unique self to the work, your work's not going to be unique. And I think that's true in so many of these, you know, examples of episodes we've done so far, whether it's Craig Melchiano, you know, his love of Star Wars. I mean, this is a guy that had a tattoo of the Yoda quote on his leg, and like, he's the guy who came up with Star Wars, you know, the Force commercial for Volkswagen, of course, you know, or Scott Burns, who was the writer of the Aaron Burr commercial in 1993 for Got Milk, guy who was obsessed with Hamilton and Burr long before it was in vogue to be obsessed with Hamilton and Burr. So just, you know, these guys and women who just brought their true selves to the table and just indulged what they thought was amazing and interesting, and didn't really necessarily always try to sublimate that with the brand stuff. You know, I mean, bringing a unique perspective is about your uniqueness as much as it is about the brand's uniqueness, I think. And that comes through in a lot of these stories. And you know, Dos Equis, I mean, Brandon and Carl came up with that campaign kind of as a joke, kind of based on like what they thought was funny at the time. And they were obsessed with certain videos making the rounds. I mean, these were two 25-year-olds who did that work. And I think they even think it's weird now that it became so iconic, because it was just really them trying to make each other laugh. So, you know, bringing your authentic self is one thing. The other thing that I think is interesting with the campaigns that we've covered so far is, you know, that so many of these campaigns really, you know, they uncover some sort of truth about the product. Not, you know, and I think a lot of brands say what they want to be true about the product without saying what's actually true about the product. And I think, you know, Got Milk is a very good example of that. So that'll be our episode 5, the one coming out next week, actually. And, you know, that campaign came out of, you know, a decades long decline in milk consumption and milk purchasing leading up to the 90s. And it was because, you know, the dairy industry was using milk as a body good, which wasn't really a truth that resonated with anybody. right? So that's what the farmers wanted to say was milk does a body good. But everybody said, I agree with you. Let me have a Diet Coke. And so the truth of milk is don't run out of it. That's what I want to, that's what I can believe in as a consumer. It's not milk does a body good, which is what a farmer wants to tell you. So I think most of these campaigns uncover some sort of truth. And this week's episode, Dumb Ways to Die, as John Meskel says, sort of towards the end of that episode, the truth there is if you get hit by a train, you're an idiot. And they were allowed to say that in a fun way, but in a way that was actually, real and true. And the client didn't, actually made it better pretty much every step of the way. And that's the other thing too, is like in almost all cases, you've got a client who is a champion of the work. It's very, very hard. I'm sure all of your students realize this already. It's very, very hard to do good work without a good client, without a client who believes in creativity, who is willing to take a risk with you, who's willing to entertain your weird ideas. Because I think that's where great work gets made as well, is through a client that believes in it, even though it's risky. So I guess those are a few things that I think hold true throughout this whole first season.
Yeah, and you're right. All these things are layered on top, right? So if these ideas are not perfectly shaped and formed in the beginning, you absolutely do need that champion to help nurture the project along. And what you're saying about the truths and there's no such thing as that sort of eureka moment. It's all about grinding away on the job, but in each one of the stories there is that piece that comes together because the hard work was done. And the one that jumps out at me at the moment is in the Always Like a Girl, when that observation was made, like, wait a minute, something happens in the way people talk about girls between the ages of 10 and what have you, and that drop off in self-confidence that was made visible by the behaviors on camera. So every one of them, as students, as you listen through the episodes, my challenge to you guys is listen for that thing that it's almost like it's like the fulcrum on a teeter-totter, where you go from just a mass of content into a real interesting idea. And Dumb Ways to Die, right? Trains are on tracks. They're not going to veer off. There's a reason why it's a dumb way to die.
Yeah, and then as I totally agree. And then once you get past the fulcrum, the craft to kind of bring it home, right? So you've got, with Like a Girl, you've got a Lauren Greenfield who's just an absolute master at interviewing people and getting them to sort of open up. And that's where the magic of that film comes from, because you've got the magic of the idea, and then you've got Lauren to kind of craft it for you. Or with Dos Equis, you've got Jeff and Carl and Brandon writing these lines, and then you've got Steve Miller of Radical Media, who literally found old cameras to film on so that he could get the look of the films right. And so I think it was Haggerty who said, it's 80% idea and 80% execution. And I think that's what shows up here too, is how important the crafting process is once you have that amazing idea.
Yeah, and that's it. And also too is, as you were saying, these ideas are coming from the varied interests of these weird characters who work in advertising. They're expressing their true selves because they've gone out there and they've experienced their true selves. It's not about staring on Getty Images and waiting for something to catch your eye. It's connecting these dots that you have in your life. And I have to think that Dos Equis was the most famous and probably the most effective expression of people collect experiences and not things. That whole idea, and
Yeah.
it's about being interesting and how that's reflected. Yeah, that's wow. So it's great to hear that there's another season coming. As I look at the episodes that you've done already, we've got a piece from 2006. We've got VW's 2011, Dumb Ways to Die is 2012. The most recent one that we've seen is 2015. So there is a historic feel to this. Do you think there's work being produced now that in 10, 12 years will be celebrating the same way?
Before I answer that, I will say there would have been more of a historic feel to season one if my Motel 6 episode hadn't crashed and burned when the Richards group was fired by Motel 6. Had an episode completely finished. I think it's my favorite episode, actually. And it will be salvageable at one point, but it's going to need a new ending and probably a few new interviews. But that one goes back to '86. So I mean, my whole thesis was it'd been running for 34 years without any hiccups, and that's out the window now. But yeah, I think so. I think today's market, I think is it's more difficult, I think, in some ways to create a campaign that's just very singular in its focus and its idea. The market is fractured so much, and the strategies have become so sort of fine-tuned per platform that I think the days of the big entertaining TV campaign that also sells really well are probably numbered. But having said that, advertising is advertising. It's going to evolve, and it's a home for creative minds to work. And I think, I wouldn't want to single one out right now. I think it's funny, as a journalist, every year we feel, and I've spoken about this with when I was at AdWeek, we speak about this every year. We'd think, this year is not as good as last year. We would always sort of think that way. And then a few years later, you look back and you think, well, actually there was a lot of interesting work in there. And sometimes it just takes a while to sort of recognize it. But I think a part of what's interesting right now is just the culture is changing so much, so rapidly. There's so much conflict in the culture right now that some of the work being produced that's trying to address that, I find really interesting. The Beats spot from last year, I thought was just incredible. The way influencers are being used is an interesting space right now. I mean, it's often done quite poorly, but when it's done well, I think it's really fascinating. But the fundamentals of great writing, great art direction, great idea, great execution, those are always going to be with us. And yeah, I mean, look, next 10, 20 years, there's going to be milestones all along the way. I mean, I think getting into advertising today is a great place to be, honestly.
That's great. And it's I think it's Dave Trott who always draws his diagram with a human head in the middle, and he puts the media around it and says, what's the one thing that never changes? Figure out a way to delight that medium versus the electronic or the other mediums. That's that universality of human experience. So I talked to Barry Waxman formerly from RGA not too long ago, and he was trying to propose that creativity should start from media now and not from the big idea. And one of the examples he used was Wendy's and Fortnite, which was a Clio winner in 2019, where they developed a character in Fortnite, went through and all it did was destroy freezers, which fit in with the Wendy's storyline. Is it fair? Is it an interesting take? Is media where the new creative is?
Yeah, I certainly think that interesting creative uses of media are fascinating. One of my favorite ideas of the last couple of years was when Burger King decided to sponsor a lower tier English soccer team for very little money, just to get the Burger King logo on the jersey, so that in subsequent years that team inside FIFA 21, the video game, would have the Burger King logo on it, so that and then they could start encouraging people to play that team in the game. So obviously that's not a strategy that you're going to use in 1986 when the Motel 6 campaign came out, right? So as media becomes more sophisticated, as gaming in particular, I mean, to me, it's no surprise that Fernando Machado is going to Activision, because the gaming worlds in particular, to me, are I think the sky's the limit creatively with that. But yeah, I mean, as media fractures, the people that can command interesting uses of it are going to break through for sure. But behind it all, you have to have a brand, right? So you have to be Wendy's before you can do Wendy's inside Fortnite. So to me, that's partly executional. I mean, it's a creative idea, and it's another creative platform of media to use. But you have to, communicate who you are to start off with, or you're never gonna, it's not gonna resonate when you get inside Fortnite. So I suppose it's almost like cartwheeling through, the process of brand building. Brand building, media choices are a bigger part of brand building than ever before, but I think the fundamentals remain true, which is that you have to find the truth about your product and communicate that truth in a way that's shareable and likable. And to me, that's the basics, and I don't think that's going to change really.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's the basics don't change. I do one thing in my class where I'll show old footage of the Burma Shave billboards on the side of the road, and then I bring up a piece of digital that does the exact same thing, which set up, and so the basics don't change. And you're right.
Well, people don't change. So
yeah,
we're still the same people we were 1,000 years ago, and it's what's changing is the world around us, and it does make a big difference for advertisers in how to activate and execute. But what's going to move us as a people is pretty set in stone, I think.
Mm-hmm. Now, I don't know if you're willing to divulge this or not, but is there an ad or a campaign and you'd love to get the story behind that you just can't, that you've been stopped to this point?
Not so far. The one that I'm working on right now that I love is the Skittles campaign from 2004 to 2008 that Chiat New York did. The folks that worked on this, first of all, they came out of the Cliff Freeman pedigree, and I also want to do an entire separate series just on Cliff Freeman and how amazing that agency was. I'm not sure many young people today even know of Cliff Freeman. I was talking to Ari Weiss yesterday, interviewing him about Skittles, and he was one of the guys at Cliff Freeman's place from 99 to 2002 or so. And there was so much interesting things that came out of that, and there were things that led up to that. But you wouldn't have the Old Spice campaign. You wouldn't have a lot of today's sort of tone in advertising if it weren't for those guys and what they did on Skittles. And there's a campaign, the Taste the Rainbow. It's still going today. It's 17 years later, and it's got a really interesting strategy behind it that was very much born out of the history of the brand, and then where it could go, how it could age up, how the internet had changed teenagers, what they could handle. Because if you look back at Skittles ads from the 80s, they're almost like for 5-year-olds, even though they were for teenagers. And it really, the work on that, I think, is such a cultural artifact, and it's, like I said, it carries through to today, and it's a fascinating story on how advertising is influenced by, but also influences culture. And I think that that's an underestimated aspect of advertising, is how much it has an influence on culture. I think people believed it more in the 80s, that it had more of an impact on culture than it does today. I think consumers today fancy themselves kind of above the fray when it comes to advertising, that it doesn't influence them, but it deeply influences the culture. And I think the Skittles story will hopefully capture some of that. But as far as campaigns that, now that you've said that, now I'm wondering if there is one that, the Apple is famously impenetrable. So I'm not sure I'm going to get their point of view on Get a Mac. The funny thing about Get a Mac is they aired 66 of those spots between 2006 and 2009, but they filmed something like 230 of them. So there's 160 spots in a vault somewhere that no one's ever seen from the Get a Mac campaign. So my dream would be to talk to Tor Miran over at Apple and say, wouldn't it be great if everybody could just see those 100? One of them has Zach Galifianakis playing a drunken Santa, apparently. So that would be my goal, would be to do an episode on the lost Get a Mac ads. Maybe that would be a bonus episode after the real Get a Mac ads.
There
That'll
we
be
go. A subscription only, maybe for that one. That would
yeah,
get the big bucks. That's
behind the firewall. Yeah.
I can't imagine 200 of those. Just hearing some of the stories about the way each script was just completely written and rewritten and rewritten and rewritten. And I think it was maybe in the Lee Cloud podcast where he talked about some of the steps behind those episodes.
Steve Jobs apparently didn't know if he liked a spot until it was filmed. So they filmed him, and then he said yes, no, mostly no, apparently. But yeah, there's another. I mean, talk about the cultural impact of that work. I mean, it came out of a really interesting campaign called Switchers that that Apple had done earlier, and the way that Apple as a brand has influenced design language in America. I mean, the whole thing is a fascinating look at. I mean, of course, going back to 1984, like Apple as a company has helped define American advertising, and that advertising has helped define American culture. So it's a really interesting case study.
Do you think it's going to be a challenge for advertising to have that same influence now that we don't have 30 million people seeing the same spot on a Tuesday night?
No, because I don't think you need that for advertising to have an impact. I mean, if anything, the worlds of music and sports and advertising are all coming together in ways that they never did before, and they feed off each other. And advertising is a big piece of that. You look at the kinds of brand deals that athletes have today and musicians have today. Advertising is more central to the culture than it ever was. And Travis Scott and Fortnite. I mean, these are and gaming too. When gaming meets music meets sports, I mean, you've got this incredible sort of branded experience that some of the best brands are tapping into. And I think the advertising writers and art directors of the future are going to play a big role in helping to shape what that culture looks like, because selling products is at the core of American culture. And so I think it may be it's a different experience than being able to, you don't have 50 million people gather around, I Love Lucy or whatever it is. But you do have enormous momentum, I think, around brands today and what brands signify in the culture. And as we go through the difficulties that we're in at the moment, politically, socially, enormous room for brands to play a role there, I think, as well, and to help steer the culture in a way that stretches beyond consumerism. And I think you see it with Like a Girl. You see it with what P&G does in general. We have an episode later in the season that will actually wrap up the season, which is about how P&G has addressed race since 2017 with the talk and the look and the choice. There are three spots that were really addressing the African American experience in the U.S. So to me, I mean, what a great opportunity there as well. Which of course, we've talked a lot about purpose in advertising, and a lot of it is sort of perfunctory, but a lot of it's real. And the brands that are doing real things in that regard, in social issues and political issues and environmental issues, that's going to be incredible culture defining work too. So to me, the next 10, 20 years, there's enormous opportunity, not only to sell things, but to change the world the way that something like a Girl did and some of these other campaigns.
That's great. That's it's a part of advertising that really hasn't been a factor yet, right? So I mean, we're watching what's happened down in Georgia this week, and with the release of the corporations that aren't paying taxes, that's part of the story now for these brands.
100%, yeah. It's exciting. I mean, it's I mean, the problem is you bump up against, profit motives and things like that. And like, what are these companies actually doing? And is capitalism sustainable and all that? Those are bigger questions that maybe advertisers don't want to delve too deep into right now, but we're going to get there, and we're going to need creative people to express that and to find the solutions for that.
Yeah, and that's it. And I think that's a great, central focus for all of us in advertising. it's the creativity that solves business problems today can actually be applied to larger problems tomorrow. And and as I explained to my mother for the 30 years I've been doing advertising, I said, Mom, at some point I won't be writing jokes about toothpaste. I'll be helping to save the world. She still hasn't bought that one. So Tim, in addition to maybe sort of the gaming world and the intersection of sports and music and whatnot, is there a part of advertising that we all should be paying a little more attention to? Is there a corner of it that's about to be something bigger than any of us give it credit for?
I've always been super drawn to out of home. I think out of home is just, as a medium, is fascinating. As the world gets more digital, the value of out of home kind of, to me, goes up, like real world experiences. And I would certainly throw experiential in with that too. But I do believe that that as we get further and further into our virtual worlds, that we do crave and will be impacted, by real things. And so, I think that's only going to accelerate. I mean, the impact of COVID on that is going to be really interesting in the next couple of years. Like, what does not having a physical world that we're used to for so long mean when we return to it? I think how brands address that will be fascinating. But I think, so you do have this dichotomy. I think it's really interesting to look at virtual worlds and what's happening in gaming. But I've always loved, I remember 15 years ago publishing a piece in Adweek. Steve Simpson, I think he was at either Goodby or Ogilvy at the time. He wrote the most amazing piece just about billboards and the power of them. And he way more articulate than I could be right now. But just I've always thought that to be true, which is, if you encounter something real in the world, it lends an instant credibility to a brand that uses it, smartly. And I think that's, again, we talk about things that aren't going away. Real world's not going away, and the more that we interact with each other and the interactions we have with brands in that space, I think hold a remarkable power, and probably will even more so, after this experience that we're going through right now.
Right, and outdoors immune from the cookie wars that are about to start, and the iOS opt out, and all, right. So there's no ad blocker for a billboard.
There's just an iconicness to it.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist virtually. Is complementary to virtual, I think.
Yeah, and I think the medium requires such a focus and a simplification of message that it adds that impact there, in addition to just the scale of it and the realness. There's nothing like standing opposite a subway platform from a really interesting piece of transit advertising.
Yeah, I think what Steve said is, yes, you're gonna curse the billboard, but maybe, and this is going to date the piece, but he said maybe that iPod billboard's a bit better arc directed than the strip mall that was blocking. So although I live in Maine and they've banned billboards here, so I don't see a lot of them.
You'll have to spend a few hours in Orlando, Florida every year just to make sure you stay sharp. Yeah, was it David Drogo who said everyone hates advertising until they lose their cat? It's just one of those things that
right.
we're an uncelebrated field, and it is a shame. So Tim, we're coming up on the hour, which is great, and I appreciate all the time. The last two questions I have for you, one is completely unselfish, and all the students know how unselfish I am. The other one is 100% self-serving. So the first one, I'll start with the unselfish one. What should our students be thinking about? What should they be practicing? What can they be adding to their intellectual toolbox to prepare them for that first job, and then also to be a real real force in the industry and make themselves on that track for high quality work, Clio level work? How do they get on Muse in 4 years and have me have a little tear drip out of my eye as I see a student on there?
Well, I think, honestly, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier with, being unique and being yourself. I think and I'm not talking about side hustles necessarily, but I am talking about just, playing around with the stuff that you're interested in, whether it's brand work or not brand work. To me, wherever that leads you, is going to be an interesting place for you, and it's going to build those creative muscles for you. And so when you do come to, listen, when you're a junior art director or a junior writer, it's going to be a slog doing the brand work anyway, probably. And so as you learn that, keep a foot in your passion, and try to produce within that passion. So I think that's really helpful, is just having that thing that you're creatively proud of, you're creatively interested in, that's going to lead you down a path that you won't necessarily be led down in your brand work. And it's all going to lead back, though, because I think if you end up feeling energized by that, it will sort of show up when you get to your job. Beyond that, I mean, I a lot of folks say, that I speak to in the business, some of them say, don't get too immersed in advertising. Don't, I would say the opposite. I think immerse yourself in as much of it as you can. And that's probably selfish of me, since we provide a service to show you that stuff or analyze it. But I do think it's helpful. I think it's helpful to understand the history of the business and where all these things came from. And there's a through line to all this stuff. I can see a through line from the Motel 6 work in the 80s to today. And it'll help you, I think, see a little bit into the future, probably not too far, but understanding how advertising has worked in the past. And, I'm sure this is what your program, is partly about, is just, seeing how where history has brought us in this, to this point. And certainly, be involved in ad Twitter, and just get involved in having a discourse with people who love this kind of work. I think that's really, important. And the folks that I see do that are the ones that, to me, like, rise to the top. The folks, at the ACD level, that I see doing great work are also, generally very active in these little communities that spring up online for advertising. So I think that's helpful. But yeah, I mean, just focus on being yourself. And, I think to me, in every industry, it's very, it's just natural to want to imitate and be like somebody else. And there's a value in that to a point. But just, accepting and embracing your own sort of weirdness and idiosyncrasies, I think is critical to coming out with something that's going to be interesting. Because otherwise, you're trying to hit a target that you think needs to be hit. Rather than do that, create your own target. I think that's really the ultimate goal of any creative person.
That's great. It's like the archer who shoots the arrow first and then paints the target around the arrow, right? All right, so that's the selfless one, and students, take it to heart. It's fantastic advice. Now, Tim, for me, this one's just for me. You guys can mute if you'd like. How do we, as a program, look to the future and try to build on a successful program that's very traditional? In fact, we've got 5 concentrations that represent the different roles in advertising: copy, art, account management, media, and research. How do we look forward as an organization and as a program so that we can better serve our students, and then they can eventually have more of an impact in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, it's, this is a hard one for me to answer. I think not really knowing your structure. I mean, I'm obsessed with creativity, the creative process, where the creative process is going, and to whatever degree you can tap into that and sort of be, have some signposts and sort of figure out what, where advertising business is going to be in a couple of years, and emphasize those skills. I mean, good luck to you, though. I mean, it's hard enough, keeping up with today's work. But I do think, if you feel like you have a good grasp on culture and how advertising is influencing that in different ways than it did a year ago, 2 years ago. I think you're on the right track. It's not easy, because culture moves so fast now. But I think there are, again, I come back to there's case studies from the last year, 2-3 years, that of brands that are doing it well, and studying those and learning those, I think is going to, like I said, give you a good signpost for the future. And then just having enthusiasm for it. I mean, Joe, I know you have enthusiasm for creativity, for advertising. That's half the battle. It's just loving this stuff. We use the term ad nerd. We have a weekly game show right now on Clubhouse. It's just called "Do You Even Ad Nerd?" And it's the folks over at Gut in Miami are helping us with this. And it's just that spirit of loving this stuff. And a lot of kids grow up sort of being told that you can't love advertising, right? And when you think about it, and when you dig deep into it, as I have for 20 years, there's so much interesting stuff happening in there, culturally, artistically, just with big ideas, with media, like you say. I mean, it's an interesting vantage point from which to track the culture, and the degree to which your program can help students track that, I think it'll be incredibly valuable.
That's great. Yeah, it's enthusiasm is half the battle, I think, and absolutely. And I always point to the students that students always ask, Joe, why did you do advertising? They say, well, there was a bus going through New York City, and Andre Agassi and Pete Sampras were in the back seat, and they jumped out at an intersection. They set up a net and they played a tennis match, and that was a Nike commercial, and that was it. It's like, I want to do that. If I can't write sitcoms, I want to write commercials like that and have fun every day. Tim, thank you very much. That's it for my questions. And I look forward to future episodes of Tagline. Don't forget, everyone, at the heart of this was, all of us trying to celebrate and get excited about Tagline. It's a fantastic podcast that does break down these campaigns, and there's strategic elements that are the framework. If you guys were a part of our Sam Adams talk the last time, everything that's interesting hangs on a skeleton of smart strategy and smart decisions. So, and Tagline is a fantastic way to deconstruct those and make you guys better creators by that deconstruction process. So at this point, I'll open up the floor to any questions that we have from the Peanut Gallery, and let's take advantage of Tim while he's here with us. And we'll start with Ari Santana.
Hi. Joe originally had a question about media and like using media in advertising, and with the rise of NFTs, like how do you see advertising intermingling with that new outlet, and like, I don't know how the Clios will respond to NFTs being a really big thing.
Yeah, we're gonna need a new category, probably, like, as if we don't have enough already. Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question. We've only really scraped the surface of what NFTs are up to. Certainly brands, we've seen a few brands sort of playing around in that space. That space to me is so unformed right now that it's hard for brands to take it somewhere, I think, beyond sort of the ones that want to be current kind of jump in and try to do something around it. I think it remains to be seen how much staying power that has. It seems like the bubble may already be ready to burst on that. But I mean, I think it's indicative of a few different things. Like an agency like RGA will investigate something like that, and fully understand it. Like they've done all sorts of interesting things with cryptocurrency over the past few years, involving some of their big clients, actually. So getting involved in those sort of micro communities, I guess you would call them, can create value for the brand if the brand comes from a place where one of the brand truths connects to it in a meaningful way. So yeah, NFTs is certainly the acronym of the moment. But no, we haven't written too much about those on Muse so far, because I haven't seen too much that I found sort of creatively unique or brand work that really I found really fascinating. But we're certainly keeping an eye out for that stuff.
That's great. Thank you, Ari. Maybe Ari, you can put together an NFT and we can auction it off. That's great. That's great.
And by the way, I wanted to mention too, entering the Clio student programs with work that you're proud of is also something that you guys should consider, because it will get noticed. The jurors are all professionals in the industry, and you can win actual Clios. It's not like a student Clio. It's a proper Clio. So enter your student work if you're proud of it.
Absolutely. And if you have things that you think are close, we got lots of people that you can bounce ideas off and help you with that process. And so Tim, we share a building with our journalism program, and we always scratch our heads because they have bylines everywhere. Everyone knows who produces every piece of journalism, and advertising is just so anonymous.
Right.
So we do encourage students enter, because that's how you get your name attached to strong work and build. And that's how you build your career once you get in there too.
Yeah, credits lists are important.
Yeah. And for students, if you find work out there, whether you're looking through CA or archive or something like that, you find work that you find impressive, there's a creative director there, there's a copywriter there, find a way to reach out to them. Ad Twitter is a fantastic way to politely stalk people and try to spark those conversations. Are you going to follow up?
I had a separate question, and I was waiting in case anyone else had questions. But
you snooze, you lose, everybody. Ari's going to own the show here.
So you have a background in English, and your career is primarily in journalism, on advertising. How, as an advertising student / upcoming professional, can I make that transition to go from person who makes ad to person who talks about ads?
Yeah, I mean, I've never made an ad in my life, so none of you should actually listen to me. Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, if you're interested in journalism, certainly the like I said before, there's not a huge clamoring of folks looking to write about advertising, and I think it is, like I said before, I think it's an interesting sort of cultural place to be. I also just find it's harder to write about music. I wouldn't know how to describe music, but I could describe a strategy and sort of delve into that kind of work. I feel like advertising has a structure that's understandable, and you can excavate it a bit. Yeah, no, I mean, if you're interested in writing, I can set you up with some folks if you want to write about advertising, because I do think trying to sit down and actually write an essay about why an ad works. I mean, we have lots of different essay franchises on Muse, and I do find it interesting when folks try to sit down and if you ask yourself, what's one thing I would write 500 words about, on the topic of creativity, whether it's a specific ad campaign or just your thoughts on creativity in general. I think that would be an interesting exercise to see what would come out of that. Probably worth doing.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's great. What other questions do we have out there tonight?
Anybody want to see a campaign on Tagline that they would be interested in?
You take requests, Tim?
Absolutely.
Riley, do you have a question, or do you have a campaign you want to hear?
No, I had a question. I know how, Tim, you were talking about how you enjoy out of home advertisements and campaigns. Do you think that Tagline would ever cover a specific campaign that was just out of home or spread across various medias?
Yeah, we absolutely would. I mean, one of the issues in thinking about Tagline for me was like, how do you make it dynamic, like audio wise? And certainly, that's partly why I love the Motel 6 episode when it eventually comes out. I hope you agree, is that there's all these, it's a radio campaign, so it's perfect for a podcast. And, Tom Baudette's voice and Tom Faulkner's music and David Fowler's writing. I mean, it all was so perfect. And I probably put too many of those spots in that episode. But I do think certainly strategy wise, and just execution, I think there's so much to be said about interesting out of home campaigns. And I don't know if Michael's still here, but I really want to do an episode on the Jay-Z Decoded campaign that Droga 5 did, probably 2009 or 10. Taking excerpts of Jay-Z's book and creating all these really interesting individualized out of home executions around it. I think learning how they decided to do all that stuff would be so fascinating. And there's probably just, interesting billboard campaigns that would be fascinating too. It's funny, every week on the game show that we do on Clubhouse, the Gut folks stick a question in there about the Economist print campaign. I mean, even a print campaign with interesting headlines, you could do a whole episode around just figuring out how they come up with the process of writing those. And, I think there's stories to be told around all this stuff. The advantage of TV and radio is that I can throw some excerpts in, and it sort of, people can stop listening to me for a minute or two and get a little breather. But no, I think idea wise, there's so much to go into with out of home or any medium really.
That's great. Thank you, Riley. Thank you. What other questions do we have out there tonight? And it may be that we've gotten to the end and exhausted everyone. Tim, is there a way, if we have students who do have some writing that maybe they want to share, or some other comments, can they get in touch with you somehow? Or
Sure, yeah, just feel free to email me. It's just tim.nudd@clioawards.com. Would love to hear from any of you guys, and help out in whatever way I can, answering questions or whatever.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
And just I also really appreciate you guys listening to the podcast. It will be nothing without people listening to it. And I know it's a commitment. An hour is a while, but it's been a joy to put these together, and it's been really great the last few weeks since this thing's launched, to sort of hear that people are enjoying it. So thank you.
No, it's a phenomenal product, Tim, and extremely instructive for the students. I listened to it and I just nod along, and no joke, I was driving back and forth to Boston, and it really was it was invigorating for me as someone who's been making ads for forever. And it got me excited so much about just the process of hammering away through ideas and getting to that finished product. So it's a great, I think you're doing a fantastic thing. I look forward to that Motel 6 one, because I teach a course on writing for radio, and that's where I start. I said, this is what radio can be and should be.
Yeah.
It's a shame with the fall from grace from the Richards Group and everything attached to that, but it's still fantastic advertising at its core.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Joe. Appreciate that.
That was my pleasure. And Tim, thank you for joining us tonight and giving up an hour of your time on a beautiful Maine late spring evening. Students, faculty, staff, administration who joined us tonight at the Bird Feeder, thank you for your time. I hope you feel recharged and rested, just like a little chickadee sitting on the edge of a suet pot. That will conclude the Bird Feeder for this year. We are always open for suggestions, recommendations, and guest ideas. And I hope that one day soon, some of you will come back and be a guest on the bird feeder itself. I hope everyone has a strong end to the semester, and I look forward to seeing you guys in person in the near future. Thank you, everyone.